You are listening to the Evolvepreneur After Hours show, and I'm your host, Richard Ray. My mission is to help entrepreneurs make a difference and navigate the messy world of startup or relaunch, commonly called a pivot. Join me today where we dig deep with our guest and get you the best concepts and strategies to fast track your business. Today's special guest is Anthony Murphy. Anthony is the founder of an award-winning digital growth agency, AttentionMedia. Having been involved in business from a young age, his career progressed from a full-time role in his family business to starting a podcast, having social media marketing clients, to taking the leap into building an agency full-time. Today, we're talking about how to drive business growth in the most challenging times. Anthony, welcome to the podcast.
Richard, thanks for having us. It's great to be here.
Really great to have you here, Anthony. And as I always like to ask my guests, where in the world are you?
We are coming to you from Shepparton, Victoria, so regional Victoria, a couple of hours out of Melbourne.
Okay, sounds like a nice part of the world.
It is a lovely part of the world, yes. The weather's normally a little bit drier and warmer than it is in Melbourne, so we're lucky for that.
I was going to say, that's got to be good news.
It is.
Hey, man, well, let's just get into this a little bit. So before we start talking about the topic of today, sounds like you had a really interesting history. Give us a little bit of your background and where you've come from and how you've ended up doing what you're doing.
For sure. So the short version of the backstory, born in regional Victoria, I'm the oldest of 8 children, had a great childhood growing up, and the business side of my journey essentially started as my dad and my uncle both owned a business themselves. So from an early age was involved in and around the family business. And that led to me, working after school hours, and then transitioning, completing school, and then getting, those first couple of years after school working in the family business as well. And that's really where my love of business stemmed from.
What sort of business was it, by the way, or were they?
It was an agricultural based business, a lot of seed and grain processing. So it was a lot of manufacturing type work, a large workforce in a sort of a factory environment. And it really being involved in more of a managerial role, working my way up to a managerial role, really sort of cut my teeth on just day-to-day business operations and how all that works. So that was the start of the business.
Was there an expectation that you would take over that business at some point?
Look, there was, yeah. So it was, I was the succession plan, to some extent.
The oldest of 8, as you say.
The oldest of 8, exactly, yes. And, my cousins were not involved in the business at all. So it was sort of on my dad's side of the family. But, at the end, we never know what happens. And at the end of the day, we've moved on and have left the family business and started an agency. So that's the journey so far.
Interesting. So let's get into the topic of today, to drive business growth in the most challenging times. So in the context of your own business, tell us a little bit about your business and how you go about that, driving growth, because, the last few years have been very challenging for everybody. We obviously came off the back of COVID and, we've had ridiculous inflation and a lot, interest rate hikes, etc. So, not everybody's buying like they used to.
No, very true, very true. And to add some context, so AttentionMedia is a digital growth agency. So we do a lot of creative work and also paid and performance advertising. And the business stemmed from the back of myself starting a podcast in 2015. And ironically, the podcast was focused on interviewing young people who were going their own way, becoming entrepreneurs, starting businesses. And from that, I started to have people reach out. There was definitely a bit of a marketing spin with that podcast. And I had people reaching out to me saying, can you help us with our social media? Can you help us with this and that? And that evolved from me, working from home, the spare room at home, looking after social media for several clients, continued to build over the years to the point where I did leave the family business and decided to go full-time growing the agency. And that point of going full-time was actually July of 2019. So
great timing.
Little did we know that, yes, a short, 4 to 6 months later, the pandemic broke out across Australia, and we went into everything that happened with the pandemic. So in terms of, starting a business in challenging times, that was definitely a great way to kick things off.
Very much so. So just taking one step back, what was that conversation like when you spoke to your family and said, "Hey, I'm actually going to do my own thing," and it was very, very different from what you grew up doing, really?
Correct, it really was. And look, I mean, I spent the best part of was just over 10 years, from sort of 18 to late 20s, working in that family business. So
Hmm.
through that time, it was the future, was that business. But it got to the point where obviously the agency was growing. I was developing interests more and more, in the marketing field, in particular marketing
Hmm.
and sales. My wife and I welcomed our first son as well,
Hmm.
in 2016, and that definitely shaped, or reshaped a lot of what I wanted my future to look like. And essentially, the conversation with my dad and my uncle was that, hey, look, they were aware that there was other work, other things that I was doing outside of my day-to-day role, and that was continuing to grow. And it got to the point where we just had to have that conversation, had to sit down, have that heart-to-heart conversation, and say, look, this is where we're at. This is the direction that we want to go in. And obviously, they were fully supportive with that. And they've since exited that business as well successfully themselves.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, it was a win-win for everyone.
Those sound great, and it almost sounds, there's a lot of people that would be listening to this podcast today. You had what appeared to be the set path, and you probably learned some wonderful things about how to run a business as you were going through that. But you
Mm.
had, and I don't want to do it down, a side hustle that started to
Yes.
get some momentum. And it got to the point where you had to make a decision which one you were going to do, because if you're going to do either of them seriously, you've got to commit.
Correct, exactly, and that was the point. It was either essentially stop the side hustle or
Mhm.
dive head first. And one of the things that I always think back on is with the better part of a decade being spent in the family business, and the thesis around spending that time in the business was to eventually own it, or be a part owner of it at one
Mhm.
point and continue on. A lot of people could look back at that and go, well, you spent 10 years in something that didn't eventuate. But obviously the learnings and that time in the family business then gave me the foundations to start my own business. So that was obviously hugely beneficial, and I'm sure that the agency wouldn't be where it's at today if I didn't spend that time being immersed in the family business itself.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with you. So many entrepreneurs and would-be entrepreneurs that I've met or interviewed or even coached, they just have a lack of experience in knowing what it takes to run a business, or even the most basic things. They think, hey, I can just start a restaurant, or I can start things that I'm passionate about, and they wonder why all the hard things are so hard. And
Yeah.
so you'd obviously had that grounding. As you moved forward, even though you were doing something that was very different from your history, did having your father and your uncle around, did that help with the sort of advice you would get on how to structure things at all? There was lessons you could take from the agricultural side into the media side?
Yes and no. I mean, it definitely was, a fairly clean break, I suppose, in
Mhm.
terms of leaving the family business, starting the agency. Obviously, my dad's always been there to
Yep.
support, and has been great in that aspect. But it really was the foundations of day-to-day running a business. Had very had been able to work through that process over many years, and
Mhm.
therefore then replicating that from a business perspective. Obviously the deliverables, the service and products are much different, but the business fundamentals obviously don't change. So
No.
that was definitely something that I was able to pick up and run with myself.
And another great positive from everything that you've done, it sounds like you didn't have to relocate to one of the major cities to do this job, even though it's a very, for want of a better description, modern job.
Yeah, correct, exactly. So at the end of the day, there was much less travel when I went full time in the agency, because I could do that in my hometown rather than
Mhm.
traveling to my dad's business. So there was some great benefits there, and the type of business that we are, being digital marketing, there's obviously massive flexibility, being able to essentially work from anywhere in most respects, and also have team members that can work remotely as well. So yeah, lots of flexibility.
That is a real positive. And, anybody that's listening and thinking, oh, no, I have to go to the big city or I have to leave my hometown.
Mm.
It's not always the case. There's actually so much you can do now without doing that.
And the
So,
opportunities as well. In a regional setting as well, with Shepparton being 2 hours outside of a capital city, often there's a lot of services that are underrepresented or that just aren't available in those regional areas. So that was definitely a strategy that we wanted to tap into and provide those more regional cities, the regional communities with the types of services that people can access much easier in a capital city.
and when you were doing that, when you were tapping into this market that was near to you, did you get a better response because, for want of a better description, you were one of them? You weren't somebody from the
So
city.
true. Yeah, correct. Yeah, having that local presence is
Mhm.
is definitely a massive advantage. People, like to feel that you understand them, their
Mhm.
community, the economic environment. So that's definitely a big factor, and also being able to still have those face-to-face meetings and build those relationships in person. That's very important.
That's I think that's a lesson that everybody can learn. You
So true.
work with the people which is always a good thing, and take advantage of any benefit that you might have. So let's get into the how to drive business growth in the most challenging of times. Like we said, coming off the back
Yes.
of COVID, you started just before COVID and everything else that's gone with it. What's your approach? What do you do?
The approach that I find works best for me to grow a business in challenging times is, we need to lean into those challenging times. COVID broke out. It's so easy for us to really retreat and protect ourselves and try and weather the storm, so to speak. But what we really need to do is try and lean into the opportunities that a hard time provides, right? So the opportunity to improve business processes, to reduce any kind of waste or areas that are not 100% necessary. So it really does help you to build a much stronger business when there are tough times. You become
Mhm.
more resourceful, you become more innovative, and that's something that we obviously had to do as well. Being a digital services business model, obviously for us, it was much easier to be able to immediately shut the office, work from home, still deliver our services.
Yes.
But then we spent, we had essentially 70% of our monthly revenue drop away when COVID first hit, because a lot of our clients had to shut their doors and they weren't able to physically operate their businesses. So there's definitely lots of challenges to negotiate there. But I think anything, in my time in business, there is always going to be tough times. There are going to be better
Mhm.
times, and they're always on the horizon. So if you're doing it tough at the moment, there's always, a positive uplift in the future. But for me, it's about leaning into those tough times and going back to the core fundamentals of how a business operates to make sure that you can keep things growing even when times are tough.
So it sounds like you very much lean into the whole concept of never let a good crisis go to waste, because that is something I've heard from
Exactly.
lots of entrepreneurs like yourself. So you mentioned one other thing, though, that I thought was very interesting about your core principles, your core values. How do you make sure that everybody in the organization and your customers know what your core principles and values are, so that you can go back to those and work?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think, in any time, whether it's good times or difficult times, making sure that you're communicating your values, what you stand for, what you stand against, is always very beneficial, because people do business with people, and they are going to want to know who you are. They need to know you, they need to like you, and they need to trust you. And if you can communicate those values, if you can communicate that message to your community, to your prospects, and to your existing customers, that's going to help you build that brand equity over time. So it's a very important part. And it's often a time-consuming part. We continually are working on our own marketing and improving that ourselves.
Mhm.
There's never really a point where something's completed and ticked off and it's just running and you don't have to worry about it. We always need to be looking at improving, looking at what we're doing, reinventing ourselves. But in terms of who a business is at their core, that's one of the things that we always talk to our clients and our partners about. We often think of a business with a shop front, a big brick and mortar business. You can
Mhm.
see the shop front, you can see the signage, you can read what they're about, but unless you go through the doors and into the business and interact with those people inside the business itself, you are only seeing the face value of that business. You don't know who is inside, what their personality is like, what they have to offer. And for us in the digital marketing space, that's what we can do. We can help businesses and brands to show people the inside of their business, what they stand for, how they can help them, and build that relationship over time. And that will naturally drive growth in a company.
So it's not just about that initial, oh, that's a pretty shop front. It's actually, you get them inside, you get them to have a full understanding of what the products and services your clients actually provide. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, that goes from both a brick and mortar store, but even to transitioning that online. A lot of businesses will pride themselves on their customer service and how they look after people and their product delivery, right? And what we want to do is emulate that feeling that they give to their customers in an online sense as well, right? We want people to have that same feeling and brand connection when they visit somebody in store as to the experience that they get online. So that's very important as well.
Very interesting. Harking back a little bit to the farming community side of things, the agricultural side, when you've built your business, have you found that you learned to prepare for the worst? With the farming industry, the agricultural industry, they have good years, they have bad years, been more bad years and good years, I would say recently, certainly in Australia. So that preparation to make sure you do have that grounding, that fallback position, has that been an important part of what you've done?
Yeah, look, I think it is. And I think, for myself in particular, the knowing your numbers in business is obviously critically important. And it's, that knowing your numbers phrase is something that gets thrown around a lot, but we can often not give it the attention it deserves. So when, economically it is tough for business, whether it's having come through the other side of a pandemic, whether it's interest rate increases, whether it's inflation, all of this is obviously going to have an impact on your numbers. So as I said at the start, going back to just the core fundamentals of business, right? So there's 6 different pillars or core areas in a business, being marketing, sales, product, operations, finance, and people. And if you can, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, make sure that you're giving each of those 6 pillars the attention that it deserves, you will be across the business enough to ensure that it continues to move forward. Now, there's always going to be times where perhaps you're not giving enough focus to the finance pillar of the business, and that's obviously critically important. Or there might be other times where the marketing of the business isn't up to scratch or isn't up to where it needs to be, depending on the goals that you've set for the business. But in order to make sure that we don't get too overwhelmed, because it can definitely be overwhelming at times, running a business, starting a business, making sure that we keep things as simple as possible and just going back to those core fundamentals. Are we doing the best job that we can with our marketing? Are we generating new customers? Are we increasing our brand awareness? Then from a sales perspective, how are our sales performing? Are we hitting our KPIs? To product, how is our product performing? Is it the best possible experience and getting the best possible results for our customers? That's going to help with retention, and so on and so forth. But just finding a way that it works for you to be able to keep those 6 pillars in mind and keep enough attention on each of them to make sure that you're heading in the right direction, even when times are tough.
And one of those 6 pillars you mentioned, obviously, is marketing, which relates to the sort of work that you do. A mistake I've seen many businesses make in tough times, recessions over the years, etc., is they cut their marketing budget. And it's quite amazing to see how they think, oh, it's an easy way to save money. But on a regular basis, it's the companies that stop being known by the customers that go under. So marketing for me is one of the areas where you don't try and save money there.
Exactly. And look, the marketing budget is often the first thing that gets cut, when cash flow gets tight. But actually, and I can't remember the statistics off the top of my head, but there were studies done over the last couple of years during the pandemic where the companies that doubled down or at least continued their marketing efforts have and will see a significant increase in their revenue and business growth over the coming years compared to those who cut all their marketing budgets. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, because we need to be seen to sell. Your product or service can be the best kept secret, but if nobody knows about it, you're not going to be able to generate sales. So
Absolutely.
oftentimes when things get tough, we look at, hey, let's stop running our Facebook ads, or let's stop producing content, let's stop recording those podcasts and do something else. But we have to think about, where are our customers coming from? And if we don't have that constant influx of new customers into the business, we're going to have a big problem. And that is where a lot of businesses in a tough period will get into trouble, is because we close off the funnel. We stop marketing our company, then our sales continue to decrease and things get more and more difficult. One of the ways, I suppose, to work through that is to look at ways where you can cut costs in other areas, become more efficient in other areas, to still be able to invest that money into your marketing channels so that you have the best possible chance of continuing to grow in tough economic times. That's our tip.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an undervalued part of any equation. But I just live by the line of, eye line is buy line.
Yes.
And if people don't know who you are, it's like being on the third page of a Google search. You might as well not exist.
I haven't been to the third page of a Google listing, Richard, for many, many years. So there you go.
Well, there you go. There you go. So, Anthony, if there was one piece of advice that you would like the listeners today to take away, what would it be?
That piece of advice, I think, would be to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that can sound quite harsh, but again, for myself personally, I've found that in business, it's always going to be much tougher than necessarily what we expect. There are always going to be challenging times. What we need to do is to be able to lean into those challenging times. And oftentimes, the most difficult thing that you need to do in a given period, the most uncomfortable conversation that you need to have in a given period, that's generally the first thing that you need to tackle. So being able to be aware of that and then lean into that, have those difficult conversations, spend the time doing the things that need to be done, but you don't love doing them. That's my piece of advice in getting through those tough times, because if you can push through that, you're going to continue to make progress. You're going to continue to innovate, and you're going to continue to put yourself ahead of everybody else who doesn't like to be uncomfortable and would prefer to retreat or put that off for another day. So if you can get comfortable being uncomfortable, you'll continue to push forward.
Fortune favors the bold. Simple as that.
Exactly.
Anthony, where can people find you, and do you have any exciting projects on the horizon?
For sure. So people can find the agency AttentionMedia.com.au, and the best place to find myself would be Instagram, Anthony G. Murphy. Always looking to connect with people, help where we can, network, and obviously build our audience. And in terms of exciting projects, we're obviously looking to continue to grow and scale the agency. And for us, that comes with the enjoyment of being able to continue to hire people, provide employment opportunities, and give people the opportunity to do the things that they love, whether that's from a creative perspective, whether that's a digital strategist perspective. But that's one of the things that brings me a lot of fulfillment, is to be able to provide those employment opportunities and allow young people in particular the opportunity to dive into a career doing something that they enjoy.
That sounds like a fantastic way to be. Anthony, thank you for your time today. A really great conversation.
Appreciate it, Richard. Thanks for having us.
Well, that's a wrap on another awesome guest episode for the Evolvepreneur After Hours show. Just before you go, if you like this episode, we would be very grateful for a 5-star review. Please also consider recommending the show to a friend or two. Make sure you subscribe for future episodes at evolvepreneursecrets.show right now. Until next time, I'm Richard Ray, and if you're an entrepreneur, make a start on your next great idea today.